if you raise taxes, in other words, if you let I wish they weren't called the Bush tax cuts. If they're called some other body's tax cuts, they're probably less likely to be raised.
That's George W. Bush acknowledging that his name appended as an adjective to anything sort of taints said thing. and so it's just a very funny sort of self-aware moment there, talking about the Bush tax cuts. Of course, the Bush tax cuts, there are two rounds of tax cuts passed. They were extended famously in the lame duck session back in 2010. They're set now to expire at the end of this year, in 2012. There's a lot of revenue on the table. But I want to get back to this question of sort of the politics of this and show some polling, Heather, and get your thoughts on this. This is ABC News Washington Post poll shows a majority of Americans see unfairness in the economic system. 52% see unfairness, 37% see no. And also, this is polling on the actual Buffett rule that the president and congressional Democrats have proposed. 60% favor, 33% opposed. How strong or deep do you think that kind of, is this polling that's sort of surface polling, or is there an actual constituency among the American populace to actually raise taxes at the higher end?
I think it's symbolic, but it's important. I think people really do feel that the economic system is unfair. That is obviously a feeling that's heightened by their own actual deprivation, whether it's in housing or jobs or health care. But what the president is doing by really going after, not a gimmick, but a sort of symbolic fairness piece, right, instead of going after something that would say, we're going to really fund early childhood education or fund our needs to win the future. That's not his message right now.
Right.
His message on taxes, it's a fairness thing. And it's the message for the conservatives as well. It's why they've been trotting out this idea that actually the core unfairness in the tax code is that, 46% of Americans don't pay any tax. Of course, we know that's not actually true. Lower income Americans actually pay about 16% of their income in state and local taxes, payroll taxes,
sales
obviously, sales taxes,
buy,
exactly.
Right.
Well, I think it's also important to note this conversation actually didn't come from the White House. The conversation about economic fairness really came from the people. You saw over the last year, after a very political debate for 2 years in the middle of this economic crisis about the size of government, which was really an R versus D debate, what you saw was people rise up in their communities to talk about economic fairness. This came from streets in Wisconsin and Ohio and Maine. It came from the Occupy movement, where people who saw maybe their kids who had worked hard, played by the rules, and what did they get for it? $50,000 in student loans and no job. This was a conversation about people who continue to be underwater on their home mortgages, saying, hey, we're sick of this. We want a real conversation about economic fairness, and I think the president's responded to that. I think the other side has not yet.
Let me ask you a question as someone who represented a swing district in Virginia, and won, I think, somewhat improbably, lost, narrowly defeated. I was down there on your election night, actually reporting on that race. I think there is a sense that the American disposition, the body politic of America, doesn't like class warfare. It doesn't like these tax the rich messages. And Republicans are very confident about that. I mean, that's why we're seeing the Mitt Romney clip we saw, right? They're trying to divide people. As someone who had to go door to door in a district that was a swing district, does the kind of message the president is saying right now, is that something you could take to the doors in your district in Virginia?
Yeah, I couldn't disagree with you more, Chris. I think this is scaring the bejesus out of the conservatives. I think a conversation about economic fairness is deeply rooted in the American psyche, and it's almost as strong among conservatives in my district as it is among liberals. They don't like the idea that the system is rigged, and they've been dealing with a rigged system for decades now. They've seen it with the outsourcing of American jobs. They've seen it with all of the tax expenditures going to the top 1%. They don't think that's fair. We don't think that's fair. And so they want that system, and I think it's put conservatives on defense in some of their reddest areas.
And I was gonna,
please, Betsy.
I mean, you saw the Romney campaign say they're trying to divide the country in half.
Right.
The Buffett rule is not about half the country.
It certainly is not, right.
The Buffett rule is not even about the top 1%, right? It's about even a sliver of the 1%, and those are the guys who literally got all the income gains over the last year.
And continue, right? Exactly. That's even under Obama.
Economy, under Obama, they're getting all of the income, and they're not paying taxes. The top 1% got $250,000 back from the government in these subsidies through tax expenditures. I mean, they're able to defeat our top tax rates, and that's what the Buffett rule is all about.
Chris, two numbers that should really explain why people feel this way. In 2010, we came out of the recession. 37% of all the increased income in the whole country went to 15,600 households. 37% to this tiny little number of households. The bottom 90%, their income fell on average back to the level of 1966. 1966, you know, China was red, automatic cars didn't have air conditioning, automatic transmissions were not standard. 1966.
Well, yeah. But here, let me press you on this, because what you're saying, what I'm hearing from you is, yes, the game is rigged. People sense that the game is rigged, right? Then the question becomes, can you unrig the game, right? And there's a certain kind of cynicism that I don't intellectually agree with, but has an emotional appeal to me, which is that any time we're going to have tax reform or start to get into the system, that the structure of our nation's political economy is so irredeemably corrupt that it will simply produce more loopholes, more special breaks, more deals, and that basically, even if we pass the Buffett rule, that 10 years from now or 20 years from now, we would view it like we view the alternative minimum tax as this nettlesome thing that we have to deal with every year, right? I mean, can the system save itself? Is it redeemable under the current political conditions?
It depends on whether we want to live in a democracy or not. That's all it boils down to. If people don't want to live in a democracy, then that's what will happen.
I don't think it's redeemable under the current campaign finance rules and under this current sort of norms that we have in our country, where, you know, I mean, you hear all of these lawyers saying, well, if, you know, if we enact the Buffett rule, you know, what will happen to my clients is they'll just shift to this, that, and the other. And it's like, well, I actually think that the Buffett rule and all of this desire to actually sort of bring the wealthiest Americans back into our country and back into investing in our country is sort of the exact opposite of what Romney says. It's like, you know, he says that it's trying to divide us. I think he's actually trying to unite us. He's trying to bring the wealthiest, by he I mean the president now, is trying to bring the wealthiest people back into some sense of a shared nation, shared contribution, and people who
a binding social contract.
So, I mean, I think that there is a sort of a cultural shift that would need to happen, in addition to obviously public financing of campaigns and all of that. A cultural shift that would need to happen where people wouldn't think it was okay to just do anything they could to minimize their own personal tax.
Of course, Romney said about his taxes, right? He said, I pay every dollar that is legally due and not a dollar more proudly. More on that after this, we take this break.